We are going to go into our next panel here, which is around building awareness, which is the discussion that we've been talking about so far. And we have two incredible people that I'll be joining on stage right now, and we're just going to add a chair here. The first one is Zain Habu. Zain, why don't you come on out here as we... There's Zain. Zain is with the United Nations Foundation, right over there. Thank you. Zain works on their digital components and engagement as well, and building awareness around the UN programs. Our second panelist that's joining Zain is Eric Ash, which is with the Truth Campaign. Eric? Have a seat. Awesome. And it's Ashy, I think I messed up, right?
You did it out of the gate.
Out of the gate. I apologize. Eric is the Chief Marketing Officer of the Truth Campaign. We're excited that both of them are here because we've got some interesting things that you've both been working on in terms of building awareness. So, Zain, why don't you give us a little sense of what's happening at the UN Foundation?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Zain Habu, and I run digital marketing at the UN Foundation. I've been there for about 4.5 years and was at National Geographic on the editorial side moving in. So total shift. But what was really interesting about the UN Foundation and what made me want to work there is the fact that at our sort of core, what we really think about doing is connecting you with the United Nations. So how do we do that? We do that through literally patching through a phone call or receiving a call from celebrities like Pharrell Williams and others saying, hey, I heard about this thing called the International Day of Happiness coming out of the UN. How can I work with them? We will contact them. Others want to talk about fundraising, et cetera. We really focus on 4 core issues: global health, girls and women, the US-UN relationship, which is very important right now if you follow the political climate, and then leading into actual climate change, which was one of the things that we were founded on in '98 by Ted Turner. Which actually leads me into a little video that we'll play in a second about climate change that we launched a few years ago. Right before COP21, which was in Paris, we started to notice that people weren't able to communicate with each other around climate science. So we started training scientists and how to speak with journalists, et cetera, and how do you make that connection so it's not intimidating. We created a coalition called Earth to Paris. We had over 135 partners, including sort of surprising bedfellows like Vogue, Swarovski, the UNFCCC, the mayor of Paris, et cetera, and started to get the world really talking about partnerships, the importance of climate change. And then, of course, the tragedy happened in Paris before COP21, and the world had to sort of pause and think about whether they wanted to go to Paris. Leaders like Ted Turner, world leaders, the president of France, et cetera, said, absolutely, we are going to carry on COP21. This is the most important time in the world to start this conversation. And because of the news that we heard last week about the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement, I thought it would be a good idea to show this video to get everybody a little bit jazzed.
Hi, I'm Jack Black. I'm here to talk about the Earth.
This is not about a celebrity inspiring you to take part, or a company trying to sell you something. This isn't about the Pope, or Lil Bub, or a cute internet hedgehog. This isn't even about saving the spotted owl, or a tree, or even a country. This is about all of us. Everything we know, everyone we love, and our survival. Never before have we had to face a challenge as big as climate change. And never before have we had a moment like this, with the awareness, the will, and the technology to fight it. This is the turning point. This December, the Paris Climate Conference will bring together leaders and experts from over 190 nations to combat climate change. But the outcome remains unclear, which is why world leaders need to hear from us now. Use the hashtag to send a message from Earth to Paris. Tweet, Instagram, march, paint, sing. Bring your voice and your creativity. Tell our leaders to make bold commitments to combat climate change. It's time for world leaders to hear from the world.
awesome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate that. Eric, let's talk about the Truth Initiative and the Truth Campaign.
Yes. So what can I tell you about the Truth Campaign?
Well, you take a different route. Most of, a lot of your pieces using creative to get the youth population to really the bystander approach, right? Talking to their friends about not smoking.
Right. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Creative is the byproduct, really, of a very deliberate strategy. And so while I'm sure most of the people in the audience viewing today would say they realize that smoking is not healthy, it's not good for them, they're not waking up today saying, gosh, if I just could see a truth campaign about non-smoking, my life would be complete. And so while this is a really serious topic, 1,200 people in the US are going to die today of a tobacco-related disease, 1,200 more people are going to die tomorrow, over 400,000 people a year in the US alone, it's not something that's top of mind because we feel like this is an asked and answered question. So for us, what we really try to do is understand what does the audience care about, and do we have a chance to overlay that with our issue and find some common ground? And we typically do. Take the environment, for example. Cigarettes is the most littered item on the planet today. Leaches into waterways. If you are taking a dog on the park or walk on the park, the chances that they're going to have to combat through the cigarette butts is pretty high. And if you think about just walking around in the city today, if you see someone actually smoke and throw a cigarette butt down, you don't think anything of it. But if you saw them throw a pizza box out on the street, you would be offended by that. Yeah. And so for us, it's how do we find these areas of interest where we do have overlap and shine a light on how tobacco is impacting you in unexpected ways. And so we do that with humor. We do that through serious topics. We talk about social injustice. If you're in DC and if you're an African American living in DC, you're exposed to 10 times more tobacco ads than a non-African American in DC alone. Why does that happen? We think it's predatory, and so we call that out. And so for us, we really try to pivot from how do we make you laugh and entertain you to engage you in on the topic, but also how do we talk about things that are serious because we know those are the things that really matter in terms of people making their mark on this world. So we're going to show a couple of examples. One, we do borrow some of the same talent. You'll see Little Bub make an appearance, but we talk about pets in the environment. I'm sorry, pets and animal welfare. So if you live in a household where you have someone smoking and there's a pet in that household, they are 50% more likely to get cancer from being exposed to secondhand smoke. And so we talk about that shared interest. And then the second spot that we'll show you really focuses on social injustice and talks about the fact that if you are in a low-income neighborhood, you are more likely to be exposed to cigarette smoking and more likely to be exposed to retailers. In fact, the tobacco industry went all the way to the Supreme Court to ensure that they could target or sell their product next to low-income schools. And so we ask, why is that acceptable? Is that okay? And should that be tolerated? So you'll see two different versions, one humor, one more serious, but hopefully you'll see the creativity is a byproduct of the strategic conversation we want to have with the audience. So go ahead and play those videos back to back if you could.
Let's talk about how Big Tobacco is investing in the future of this country. A recent study found that low-income neighborhoods are more likely to have tobacco retailers near schools than other neighborhoods. How convenient. In fact, Big Tobacco went to the Supreme Court to keep tobacco advertising near schools. Cool, huh? Nothing says commitment to youth like a hard-won legal battle. It's not a coincidence. It's profiling. Don't let it go unseen. Enlist at thetruth.com. Be the generation that ends smoking.
Thank you. Let's give him a round. So those two are definitely two other issues, two separate issues underneath the larger campaign. How do you decide which one that is more important than the others? Because even in the UN here, you've got the UNDP goals and all these other kinds of things. How do you prioritize awareness? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, first and foremost, we think of ourselves as a player and creator of culture.
And so we really do think about how do we influence culture and influence the decisions that people are making versus how do we get a piece of communication out into the marketplace, which if any of you are brand marketers in the audience, that may sound very obvious, but from the public health lens, we're very conditioned as public health people to think about communicate what you want the audience to do. Go get tested, get a vaccine, don't smoke. Well, that last one, if I say don't smoke, that has the opposite effect on the audience because in many cases, if you're talking to a 12 to 24-year-old, the last thing I want to do is be an authority figure to them. We want them to be empowered to make the right decision. So for us, we look for and monitor what is going on in culture. Where do we have cultural movement? Where can we be part of that momentum? And so we really do try to attach ourselves to the momentum we see in the marketplace. And you'd be hard-pressed to find another topic similar to that last commercial that we showed, where the divide and the tension between our cultures today is so omnipresent and so palpable that we decided to play into that momentum. What we'll do in the next iteration, the next several months, we'll have to wait and see, but really it's looking at what's happening in culture. Do we have a story to tell? Is there an authentic way that we can bridge the gap? And if we do that, if we can find that nexus, then that's when we move forward with those different messages.
Zane, how about at the UN? How do you prioritize?
So we go a lot with what the UN would like us to do. So we're very much not your grandfather's foundation, and we're also not part of the UN system. We're an affiliate of the UN, and we were launched in '98 by Ted Turner and the then Secretary General Kofi Annan to be the sort of quote-unquote bestie to the UN. However, it means we can get ahead of them, it means we can't get ahead of them, et cetera. But most recently, in 2015, the UN was launching what was called the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. So we know that's a priority. It's a priority for us to work with the public sector and with the private sector on how we communicate those goals. So a lot of those will be looking at what's happening in the zeitgeist. How can we communicate about this to a young audience? We know that speaking to 50 and above is interesting. They're the ones implementing in the field, but we need to get millennials and younger talking about these goals and caring about them. So we prioritize based on what they say, and then we also prioritize based on what our audience is telling us they're interested in. Our audience cares about girls. Our audience cares about climate change. So we create campaigns like the Girl Up campaign at the UN Foundation, which is for girls by girls, where we have the girls themselves go around the world and decide what the campaigns are that we'll do in Guatemala. For example, setting up an initiative called School Cycle, where we raise funds to get school bicycles for girls to go to school to lower the incidences of rape and kidnapping, et cetera. So it's by the audience and by the UN.
We're going to go to now some questions from the audience. So audience, feel free and put that into MCON2017.com. And then one of the first questions, Eric, is around how do you measure impact and success?
Good question. I will try not to nerd out too much on that. I would say we spend a lot of time and energy evaluating the campaign before we go to market, and then once it's in market, and then the impact it has on the consumer, the long tail. We have a longitudinal cohort of about 14,000 individuals that we follow over a 4-year period. So we get a baseline, those who are aware, unaware, what are their attitudes around tobacco. We also have a theory of change that is attached to different attitudes around tobacco that we know if we affect, for instance, mistrust or distrust in the industry, the consumer is less likely to try the product, which is one of the reasons why we go at the industry so hard. So we have these knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, if you will, KABs. We follow them, track them over time, and we track an individual throughout their journey to understand what impact are we having as they are exposed to the campaign. So hopefully that makes sense in sort of the Reader's Digest version, but we take that very seriously. We view the tobacco industry as a competitor. We're competing for market share, and they are a formidable foe. And so we have to have our ducks in a row so we're prepared to meet that challenge.
Zane, how about you, measuring success?
We measure success threefold. One is, do the UN like what we're doing? So that would be success for us. The second is we take a look at, obviously, hashtags such as SDGs, climate change, et cetera, around the world, using tools that everybody uses, Keyhole, et cetera, on social media. And what we try to see is not only how many people we've reached, but really what the engagement levels are like. So for us, a lot of it is going to be around engagement. And then the third is how much press is coming out about the issues. So we have pretty complicated mechanisms in place where we are tracking every single article that comes out that either mentions development or the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we're able to reach, let's say, close to 2,000 journalists in close to 40 countries around the world and continue to increase that goal, that's what we call success.
All right, so Zane, I'm going to stick with you because this is the question that everybody wants me to ask. We've got almost 20 votes going on right now, which is, even from the digital side, we're bombarded by social media campaigns these days. How do you combat campaign fatigue in your audiences?
We have several different campaigns at the UN Foundation, so we don't do everything just from the UN Foundation. Otherwise, we would look like we had split personality. So we have Girl Up, as I mentioned earlier, which focuses on teen girls and issues around girls and women, leadership, empowerment, you name it, around gender. And we try to focus our messaging as much as possible in our campaigns as much as possible using Girl Up. We then have Shot at Life, which focuses on vaccines and global health. And they even have mini sort of baby campaigns that come out of them, like the Global Mums Challenge, etc. And then we have Nothing But Nets, which is focused on malaria. We have about 27 of these and growing. They're either called campaigns or initiatives. And we try to really push out social media campaigns using those verticals so that we're not killing the UNF audience.
Eric, how about you? Campaign fatigue. How do you combat that?
That's a really good question. And we're similar vein, similar tactics. One of the things that, just to be additive, what we're trying to do is really listen to the audience. And so we do a lot of sentiment analysis and on top of what are we seeing from the engagement metrics to really understand, are we pushing too hard? Are we being too serious? That's why the brand, sort of when we think about the communication, it's all under a brand umbrella. If I could convince people not to smoke based on the merit of the argument, we wouldn't exist because the merit of the, I win that argument, but that's not why people make these decisions. And so the temptation, if you're in my shoes, is to always be the hammer of I have the moral high ground, so therefore I'm going to exercise that hammer. And that creates fatigue. People get tired of hearing that. I know it's bad, I got it. So in our case, what we try to do is reward you for engaging with us, and we entertain you, and we give you some bit of information and news that you otherwise wouldn't know. But one of the ways that we try to monitor that is by looking at that sentiment, understanding what the audience is saying back to us, and really listening as much as pushing our agenda. It's a two-way street.
So we have a couple questions about localization of both of your work, but it also, this particular question is interesting, and it goes first to Zane. It is, Zane, coming from a rural flyover state, what are some of the steps or tools we can do on a local level to engage in climate change and in current conversations? Obviously, given after the election, this importance of all America as well.
Sure. So the first thing I would say, and I'm, newly American, so forgive me for not knowing everything about American politics, but the first thing I would say is find your local representatives. I think there's a lot of value in the offline side of this first. Find your local representatives. Go find out where they sit on the issue. Most often, by the way, as we've seen since last week, a lot of cities and states in this country have decided to go with the Paris Agreement anyway and to continue to fight for climate change. If they don't, then it is your job to make that happen. So you go there, you find them, come to Washington and lobby. You'd be really surprised at how open your congressman, your senator is going to be to hearing your argument. You have every right to be in that house making it your case. It is your house. So that is one thing I would say from an offline perspective. From an online perspective, we have a campaign called Climasphere, CLIMASPHERE, which is a website that aggregates news about climate. There's also earthtoparis.org, where you can go and find out how you can join any organization and help in a very local way fight for your cause. But I really would start local. I really would start with your representative.
Eric, final.
Yeah, I would say in the same vein, we believe that everyone is an influencer. Everyone has a social media footprint, a friend cohort, a family where they can make an impact on the way people are thinking about important issues. So number one, I think, is be engaged. We also offer a very broad footprint through our digital platforms, and so we would love people to enlist at thetruth.com and be part of our movement. We're also trying to sync that up with on-the-ground chapters on college campuses across the U.S. and high schools across the U.S. And so now is the time to engage and raise your hand and be one of those individuals for us and help us finish it.
Great. Let's give them both a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.